Okay, I think we'll kick off then. I think we've got quite a lot of people that have joined already, so hoping everyone can hear me. So I'm Lindsay, I'm the Chief Executive of Metabolic Support UK. Thank you and welcome to everyone for joining our webinar today. We're bringing you today's webinar in what are quite simply extraordinary and exceptional times, and times that are bringing real fear, anxiety and worry to patients and their families who suffer from rare conditions. So to try and help support you all through this time, we've put together today's webinar entitled Facing Coronavirus Together, Tapping into the Resilience of the Rare Disease Community. We've brought together some of the UK's top clinical psychologists to give you some advice on how to psychologically survive these times. As well as the metabolic community, we're also pleased to be joined by carers and those living with another rare disease, Duchenne muscular dystrophy, and the founder of Duchenne UK, Emily Crossley. Welcome to you today, Emily.
Thank you so much, Lindsay, and it's a pleasure to be on this webinar with you, and thank you so much for organising it. Whilst there are many differences in the diseases that our communities both face, I think our common challenges are the same, especially when it comes to this issue of psychological health, and so we're very grateful to you to extending this advice webinar to our community too, so thank you.
Thanks so much, Emily. So this is how it's going to work. We've got Dr. Lynn Aitkenhead, clinical psychologist, and Dr. Emma McGibbon, also clinical psychologist at Great Ormond Street, and Dr. Penny Andreou, and they have a presentation that they are going to start presenting in a moment. At the end of the presentations, there is going to be an opportunity for people to submit questions. So please use the Q&A button on the Zoom toolbar at the bottom of your screen, and we'll try to answer as many of the questions as they come in. So without any further ado, I think we'll hand over to Lynn.
Thank you, Lindsay and Emily, for organising today, and thank you to everybody who's signed in to listen. So I work with adults who have inherited metabolic disorders. That's my experience. I'm going to be talking a little bit about some things that might help build up your resilience and able to manage all of the anxiety and fear that we're all feeling at the moment. If we just move on to the next slide. So I'm sure you don't really need me to tell you this. This is why you've signed in today, because lots of countries around the world have been affected by this virus, COVID-19. And at the moment, everybody in this country is being asked to follow lockdown and social distancing guidelines. And so for absolutely everybody, that's a source of a lot of difficult feelings, including feeling anxious and worried about our own health and other people's health and what's going to happen in the future, including perhaps feelings of sadness and loss about some changes in your plans or circumstances. And also a lot of feelings associated with the lockdown, spending more time at home, spending more time around our immediate household, perhaps feeling bored, feeling irritable or frustrated, feeling lonely. But for those people who are living with a long-term complicated condition, there might be some extra sources of stress or anxiety that you're dealing with. You may have been advised to follow something called shielding guidelines. I'll say a little bit about what they are for people who don't know. You may not be able to get the support that you usually would get when you go to your clinic appointments or you meet with your specialist team, or some of your usual treatments or planned treatments might not be happening right now. I know some of the people listening might rely on relatives or carers to help them with their essential day-to-day activities, or you might be a carer who's helping somebody else to cope, and those arrangements may have had to change at very short notice. And also there may be changes in the support that you can get from other services you usually rely on, like social care, perhaps mental health services, rehabilitation services, that kind of thing. So a lot of challenges for absolutely all of us, and perhaps a few extra ones as well. And if we go on to the next slide. So one of the things I've been doing over the last few weeks is talking with a lot of the people who've been seen in our service for people with inherited metabolic conditions about how they've been coping with the lockdown and with shielding. And one of the things that I really noticed is that I think people who are living with a rare condition really have a lot of resilience and a lot of experiences that they can draw on to help them cope in this really challenging and difficult time. So for example, a lot of the people I spoke to you know, they've faced and overcome a lot of challenges in their lives before. Perhaps they have learned strategies already to deal with worry or uncertainty about their health. Perhaps because of their health, they might have had some periods of reduced contact with other people, for example, after surgery. They may already have had to adapt their activities to accommodate physical barriers, for example, by connecting with people online. They may have become quite good at understanding when difficulties are temporary and are going to pass with time, and also at recovering and coming back, having learned from the experience, being able to apply what they've learned to new challenges in the future. And if we just go to the next slide. So I guess I wanted to acknowledge the extraordinary resilience that a lot of the people I've been speaking with already have, and just how I'm continually impressed by how well people are coping in what is an incredibly difficult circumstance. And I wanted to offer a few tips for things that we know can help to maintain or increase or build resilience. So you can see 5 of them here. I'm going to focus on a couple, but broadly, some of the things we know can help are prioritizing, so making sure you give time to the things that give you a sense of enjoyment or achievement, and also making sure that you say no to some of the other things that you're not going to realistically be able to fit on your plate right now. Practicing good self-care, which includes things like getting a good balance of rest and sleep, following a healthy diet, doing some exercise if there is something you can safely do at home, perhaps learning relaxation to help manage the physiological aspects of the stress and uncertainty and anxiety you might be feeling, developing an understanding of patterns of thinking or behaving and how they affect you, and also building connections with other people that can help you to access help and support from them. So we just skip ahead to the next one. I'm going to say a bit of background just about what anxiety is. You may have thought about this before, or you might not have done. Psychologists think of it as part of the fight or flight response. So it's the response that your brain and body have evolved to deal with a threat or a danger in your environment. And it's evolved to keep us safe. So if you think about when your mind was evolving, when people were hunter-gatherers thousands of years ago, in order to perform that role, in order to keep us safe, our brains had to be really good at spotting any possible threat, any possible danger. So they are constantly pinging up thoughts to us. What if this happens? What if that goes wrong? And that includes thoughts about other people, because humans are social animals. We rely on other people to survive. So they're also pinging up thoughts. What if they don't like us? What if we're not good enough? Are we doing everything we should be doing? So that's part of our brain's job that it's evolved to do. But it does create feelings of anxiety. And when that response is triggered, our body releases adrenaline, which causes a whole load of physical changes. It might make our muscles tense up, ready to run away from the threat or to fight it off, might make our heart beat faster, might make our breathing faster, might make us get sweaty or have butterflies in our stomach or feel a bit lightheaded when all the blood goes to our muscles to prepare them. So anxiety is not just an emotion. It has all of these components to do with the thoughts your brain is pinging up for you, to do with the physical reaction in your body as well. And if we go on to the next slide, I'll say a little bit more about thoughts. Again, just in case you haven't thought about these before, but thoughts are not something physical and real that's external to us. They're a mental event. They're something that happens in our mind. And we tend to assume that they're true and feel and act as if they're true. But of course, they're not necessarily 100% true or accurate or 100% helpful to us. They tend to be biased by our own experiences, which shape the beliefs we form about ourselves, about other people, and about the world. And also, they might not be 100% true because we can never know 100% of the facts about a situation. So they may be more or less helpful to us. And I'll talk a little bit about some of the thoughts that might be coming up in the current situation and what you can do if they're not being helpful. If we just go on to the next slide. So I know Metabolic Support UK has been asking people about some of the things that are sources of anxiety at the moment that they might be struggling with. And I've also been talking with people in my clinic about these issues. And 3 big topics that came up were shielding, for those people who've been asked to follow shielding guidelines. Also managing your treatment and care for your rare condition, and also coping at home. So just to say a little bit about what shielding is for people who don't know, we're all supposed to be practicing social distancing. Shielding takes that further, and for people who've been identified as being extremely vulnerable to COVID-19, they've been asked to follow this special guidance to reduce their chances of infection. If you are recommended to follow that guidance, you will have received a letter with information about it. You can read more about it on the gov.uk website, or there's a really good webinar that Metabolic Support UK made that you can watch a recording of on their website. So really understandably, for those people who are affected, that's been a big source of worry and concern. And if we skip to the next slide, I'll tell you a few of the thoughts that other people have spoken about shielding. So these are thoughts from the Metabolic Support UK community and also from people who I've spoken to who agreed for me to share some of their thoughts today. For example, my social life is going to be completely destroyed. What if I get sick at work? What if I make my family ill? I have to clean absolutely every item that comes into the house, 100%. I can't see an end to it. When you go back to the normal world, what's life going to be like? What's going to happen next? You don't know. And if we go on to the next slide, there's some thoughts here that people have told me about their treatment and care, not being able to manage at home. What if I have to go to the hospital? It will be terrifying. I'll be forgotten. There'll be nobody available to help me. And what if the people I'm relying on, what if they get sick? And then lastly, some of the anxious and worried thoughts that have come up about coping at home. I have to do absolutely everything that I was doing before. I'm not doing homeschooling right, or equally, I'm not doing home working right, or I'm not doing the new skills I'm supposed to be developing in lockdown right. I'm going to fall behind. I can't take time for myself. Everyone is under pressure and I can't add to it by asking for help. So you can probably already start to see how those thoughts might not necessarily be wrong or untrue, but how they can be more or less helpful in different situations perhaps. We need some stress and anxiety because that motivates us to do the things we need to be doing and making changes like working from home, social distancing, hand washing. But equally, if some of these biases or patterns are happening, they might lead that thought to be a bit unhelpful to a particular situation. So it's always worth checking in whether perhaps you're seeing the picture in black and white. You know, either I'm succeeding and my house is 100% sterile with no viruses in it, or I'm failing if I don't disinfect absolutely everything. Are your expectations realistic? You know, is it realistic to expect that you won't fall behind? Probably not. Probably most of us are going to fall behind because we've had to make big changes to our usual work and life patterns with very little time to prepare. Am I expecting the worst case scenario? Am I trying to predict the future or read other people's minds? And my personal favourite question to ask yourself, if a friend were in the same situation, what would I say to them? And I like that one because I think quite often we're better at being kind to other people than we are at being kind to ourselves. So this can help you kind of tap into that kindness and just check that you're treating yourself the same way you would treat someone else that you care about. So just going on to the next slide. The other topic I wanted to say a bit more about when it comes to those ideas for increasing resilience is connecting with other people and relationships, and in particular about the way that we communicate and perhaps practicing or developing this assertiveness communication style. So you might have heard assertiveness before. It's a way of communicating with people which falls in that middle ground between being passive and kind of saying, oh yes, whatever you want to do, however you want to do it, and aggressive and saying, look, it's my way or the highway. It's a way of communicating with people that says in a really direct, open way what you need, but also acknowledges the needs of the other person and respects them. So it's difficult. It's not something that everybody gets right all the time. But you know, where problems quite often arise is that when we need something from someone else, we tend to hint about it or maybe say it a bit indirectly, and then maybe they make their own thoughts and beliefs about what we're asking for and respond to them. We have our own thoughts and beliefs about what they think and respond to those, and we end up in a cycle of misunderstandings and not getting things quite right. So it's really helpful to practice communicating in this way. And if you just go on to the next slide, there's a few tips and ideas for how perhaps you could try developing a more assertive communication style. So accepting that, like any skill, like learning to ride a bike or play the piano or something, it takes practice and it takes trial and error, which means some of the time it won't go quite right. It's a good idea to start with the situations that feel easiest and to work up to the ones where it feels a bit more difficult for you to be assertive. You might want to practice that skill of noticing what thoughts come up. So for example, are they thoughts that if you say no to something, someone might dislike you or reject you? Are they thoughts about what it means about you if you ask for help with something? Does it mean you're not a strong person? Of course, asking for help doesn't mean you're not a strong person, but it's a thought that comes up for a lot of people that might get in the way. Some people find it helpful to create a kind of mental image of a person who's really assertive, who they perhaps admire. It could be a real person or a fictional person, but someone who manages to be direct and honest, but also warm and friendly, and to respect themselves and other people, and think, you know, how would they respond in this situation? How would they act? What would they say? And it's always a good idea to spend some time thinking back on occasions when it didn't quite go right or as well as you would have liked, to think about how you would handle them differently in the future and give you an opportunity to kind of fine-tune your new assertiveness skills. And we just go on to the next slide. I've put one slide in here about talking with an adult who has cognitive impairment, because it's something that comes up in my neuropsychology clinic a lot. You know, my main advice would be to be honest with that person, but to try to give the information in a calm way, and for you to stay calm while you're talking about coronavirus, to break the information down into chunks, try to use concrete and common words. Be aware that there might be some misunderstandings, so try to be tuned into those, or you might need to repeat some bits to help someone to take it in. And you can really help them by modeling positive ways of expressing the way you are feeling and coping with it. You can also help them by being honest if you don't know something, it's okay to say, or if, you know, the situation hasn't changed and there's no new information. And if we just go on to the next slide, I wanted to include some other thoughts from people who I've spoken to in the metabolic neuropsychology clinic. So these are thoughts that people have given me permission to share with you today that they have found really helpful. I'm taking each day as it comes. We can only do what we can. It's made me appreciate my normal life more. I'm looking forward to all the things I can do when the lockdown ends, and I feel positive about everybody working together to cope. I'm hopeful that this can continue after the crisis ends. And if we just move on to the next slide. So the professional community and service user organisations have had some time to respond and to make resources that might help you too now. I've put a lot on here. I'm not going to say too much about them, but perhaps if you just screenshot them, you can take a look through, follow some of the links, see if there's something useful for you that might help you in there. And if we go on to the next slide again. So one that I wanted to particularly draw your attention to is this video by Dr. Russ Harris, who is a doctor and a therapist, who's made a video about coping in the COVID-19 pandemic that I thought was really helpful for a lot of people. In fact, it really helped me decide how I wanted to respond to this crisis. So I'm not going to talk through it in too much detail. I'd really recommend you go and watch the video. So just type "face COVID" into YouTube and you should be able to find it. But very briefly, if we go over to the next slide to give you an idea of what it's about. It goes through these steps of your community and other people around you. So focusing on what's in your control, accepting that, you know, you can't control the virus, you can't control the economy, you can't control the future, and you can't control what worried thoughts pop into your head and what feelings come up for you. But focusing on those areas where you do have control, the things that you can do. Acknowledging your thoughts and feelings, so perhaps accepting some of those difficult feelings even though they feel unpleasant. Coming back into your body, perhaps by doing some stretching or some mindful breathing. Engaging in what you're doing and giving your full attention to the here and now and the present moment, rather than perhaps running away with worries about the future or ruminating about things that happened in the past. Committed action, so doing something effective, even if it's small, that is helpful for you or for the other people around you. Opening up to the experiences and some of the difficult feelings that brings up, making sure it's guided by your values. Those are the things that are really important to you deep down, that perhaps guide who you want to be as a person. It might be to do with you know, being a good parent or sibling. It might be to do with helping your community or learning and growing. Identifying resources that can be useful to you, whether they're in your personal life, your friends and family, or whether they're professional services like the NHS or social care. And of course, the things that we should all be doing that can help to protect ourselves and the people around us, disinfecting and distancing. And if we just go on to the last slide. So I suppose if anxiety or other emotional difficulties right now for you are really seriously impacting on your everyday life, if they're stopping you from doing the things you do, stopping you from enjoying things you are usually able to enjoy all of the time, or if they're not getting any better, you can consider asking for more help with those. Your metabolic centre or your specialist centre might be able to point you in the direction. Your GP also will know what services or sources of support there are for you. If you're having kind of mild to moderate difficulties, if you search online for "can I get free therapy or counselling," you'll find a website where you can put in your address and find out how to make a self-referral near to where you live. You could also contact your patient organisation, for example, Metabolic Support UK, are providing information and advice to people about coping during the pandemic. And I think that takes me to the end of my slides. So I'm going to hand over to Emma, who is going to talk a bit more about issues for parents and children during the current crisis. Emma is a specialist psychologist at Great Ormond Street Hospital who works with families who are affected by rare conditions.
Okay, thank you very much, Lynn. That's right. So I'm a psychologist at Great Ormond Street Hospital, and today I'm really going to be thinking about how parents are looking after themselves and their children, and in particular thinking about children who might have neurodevelopmental needs, such as a diagnosis of autism, of a learning disability, might have physical needs, but really this advice can apply to all of us. And as Lynn's already discussed, as parents, you have a lot of experiences and skills that you can draw on. So don't forget what you already know for yourselves. And a lot of what I say, it won't be new. It might sound like common sense, and that's probably because you're already doing lots to keep yourself and the people you care about well. You really know yourselves and your families well and have the experience of what ideas will work and what won't work. So really use your instincts and knowledge of your own situation. And if you're not sure, then you can always ask somebody that you trust. So if I can move to the next slide, please. So I guess a key message is that it's okay not to be okay. As the virus spreads, more and more people are becoming anxious about what that might mean for themselves and their loved ones. And it's completely understandable and very normal to feel anxious about this time, and you really aren't alone. But it's also important to remember that we will get through this, even though there is a lot that's out of our control at the moment. As Lynn's just been speaking about, there is a lot that we can do to help ourselves and the people that we care for. So it's really important to focus our minds and our activities on those things. And although we don't know how long it will last at this stage, we know that it won't last forever. And just to mention really, if you do have a mental health need that's feeling more difficult to manage, or the anxiety or other feelings are becoming overwhelming, then do contact your GP or your local mental health service for some direct advice. And in an emergency, always contact your local A&E department. So if I could have the next slide. So working out the things that you can control and the things that you can't. The single most useful thing anybody can do is really focus what is in your control. You can't control the virus itself or how the government manages it, and you can't magically control your feelings or eliminate your perfectly natural anxiety, but you can control what you do in the here and now. And that's important because what you do here and now can make a huge difference to yourself and to your children. We all have far more control over what we do, so our behaviour, than what we do over our thoughts and our feelings. So a number one aim really is to take control of our behaviour, and to respond effectively to this crisis. So think about how much news that you're listening to and you're reading or you're watching, and do things that you know that help yourself to feel calmer. As parents, that's really key, is to try and keep yourself as calm as you can, whether that's exercising, whether that's spending time reading, listening to music, whatever it is that you know helps you to feel calmer. It's really helpful to draw on those things. So if I could provide the next slide. So thinking about providing reassurance to children, letting your child know that they are safe and that you and the government and the NHS are working hard to keep them safe. And what they can do is to follow the rules around isolation and hygiene. Giving your child information about the coronavirus, thinking about it as a need-to-know basis. So being honest, but keeping it simple and age or developmentally appropriate. Letting them know it's okay to feel worried, that we all do, but by social distancing and shielding if needed, then that's going to really help to keep them safe as well. It's best to try not to give absolute guarantees because we don't know what's coming and what might happen, but answer their questions honestly and simply with as much reassurance as you can. And then you can try and divert them away with another activity. You could watch some TV together or play something fun. You might also want to let your child know that it's the government's decision to close schools. Sometimes children can find it easier to follow rules if they do not feel that the rules have been made by parents. And let your child see that you're in control, because if parents appear to feel like they know what they're doing, that can really provide some good reassurance to children. The next slide. So again, thinking about things that are in your control. The amount of information that your child's exposed to, really keeping them away from the news and other reminders of it throughout the day if you can. You know, news isn't designed for young children, and it might cause them unnecessary anxiety. So turning off the radio or the TV when the news comes on, or when people start talking about the coronavirus. Sometimes children, especially on the autism spectrum, might ask repetitive questions that can be caused by anxiety. And our advice around that really is to answer the question once or twice, and then let them know that you've answered the question and you're not going to answer it again, but trying to strap them onto something else that they might enjoy. If it keeps on happening, you could ask them to answer the question for you, and you might want to write that down, and so you can remind them of what the answer is. But the key really is to try and not get drawn into those questions as much as you can. And if you find that your child is asking and focusing on the coronavirus more than you think is helpful for them, you might want to designate a coronavirus time, maybe 10 minutes a day, to as a time that they are able to talk about coronavirus, and outside of that time try and distract them onto something else. Okay, so for the next slide, so thinking about how to explain coronavirus to children, it might be helpful to write a story. The National Autistic Society has put together some social stories that you might want to have a look at on their website. And the Great Ormond Street Hospital website also has lots of links and advice about how to provide explanations about coronavirus to children. So there's a couple of websites there that I have put links into. Okay, and the next slide. So thinking about structure and routine, this can really help us all feel a bit more in control. And with schools and normal activities not happening at the moment, children will be out of their usual routines. We know that for children with additional needs, this can make them feel more anxious. So trying to create a new routine, even if it's at home, so that they get into a new rhythm, will be really helpful. And you can use visual symbols to make a timeline to let children know what's going to be happening each day and how their day is going to be filled. It might be quite nice to have a different routine during the day, during the weekdays compared to the weekend, so that gives them a sense of the week's passing. And finding a way to structure the day by dividing it into chunks of time. Using a timetable can be quite helpful, and some children in specialist schools might be very familiar with this. And there's an example there on the slides of different diagrams showing different activities throughout the day. So the next slide, please. So when you're thinking about choosing different activities, it will be really helpful for your child to help to choose the activities if you can. Some children won't like the timetables, and so you might want to have an activity menu where they've got different choices of activities, or they might want to choose the order that they're going to do different activities in. To pace things and to give you a sense that you're progressing through the day, you might want to tick off activities as you go. But really don't feel the need to fill the whole school day with structured activities. You know, think of this as an opportunity to develop other practical life skills too, such as cooking or cleaning, or involving them in planning of the day. So don't feel too much pressure from to continue with the education that your child would be having at school, because it's not the same. And thinking about play and relaxation, children do need a lot of play, whatever that might mean for them. Again, the Great Ormond Street Hospital website, I've put a link in there. The play specialists have put together some different activities that you might. I think it's fair to say that sometimes playing with children can be a bit boring for adults, but if you can try and find things that you can enjoy together and mix that in with some of their choices, that might be a way to keep people happy and stimulated. You You also might want to think about teaching children how to learn to relax themselves, especially if they are feeling anxious about things. You might want to teach them slow, steady breathing. You might want to try listening to soothing music, listening to audiobooks together. The internet's got a lot of child-friendly relaxations and meditations at the moment, and so you can have a browse around and see what you can find that works for you and your family. And of course, looking after our bodies, trying to continue eating healthy foods as much as we can and being as active as we can, even when we have to stay at home. So when you're thinking about what activities you might try, it's quite a nice rule of thumb to make sure that you have a good balance of activities in your day. You might want to think of them under these categories of activities that help you to achieve something, activities that provide social connection, and activities that you enjoy. So achievement might be to do with schoolwork or keeping a diary, listening to a book, doing an exercise class, helping else, maybe doing some cleaning. Enjoyable activities, whatever you and your children enjoy to do, and then making sure that you're having that social connection. So contacting family, contacting friends, people with online communities around their interests, setting out and planning and agreeing times to call people regularly so that you're making sure that you're staying in touch with people and feeling like you're still part of their worlds. And then just thinking about exercising and making sure that movement and exercise is included in everybody's day. Exercising can really help children and adults to stay calm and to manage stress, and it also importantly tires children out during the day so that they are more likely to sleep well at night. If you can go into outside spaces, if you're not shielding, then you can do so. And in fact, the government's actually relaxed the rules for people who have additional needs, including those on the autism spectrum and people with learning disabilities. So if you are able to go out more frequently, if that's needed, you can encourage them by playing with them and making it fun. You could find some fun dance classes online or children's yoga videos. There's the Joe Wicks daily PE classes. If they're able to do those, that can be a good way to start the day. And using reward charts and reward systems that you've tried with your child in the past to encourage them to follow the timetable, not be so keen to do. So just finally, some final thoughts really. Just this is a stressful time for everyone, and you have a lot to manage, and remembering to be kind to yourselves and be realistic about what you can achieve. You're already doing a lot to help yourselves and your families during the coronavirus, so really take time to recognise what it is that you are doing. And if you think you'd like to change something, just pick one thing to work on at a time. Don't try to do too much at once, but focus on the thing that you think might be most achievable or most important to you at the moment, and focus on that before taking on another change. And really looking after yourselves and remembering that, you know, we will get through this. It won't last forever. So I think that is the end of my slides. I think Lindsay is going to think about the questions.
Thanks so much, guys. They were brilliant. Thank you so much for doing those. Yeah, we've got about 4 questions, I think, that we've whittled down that we think are really good. So if I start by asking Lynn, Penny and Emma, I don't know who you think would be the best to answer this. So question 1 is, I'm currently following shielding guidelines in a flat with no outside space. I'm really struggling with there being no clear end to this. Can you help me by giving me some tips on how I might be able to improve my mental health?
I had a few thoughts about that question, and you know, obviously it's really hard for us to give individualized advice to people who we don't know and haven't met, but I have a few general ideas for people who are in that situation of shielding when they live on their own. You know, I guess first of all, I just wanted to say it must be extremely hard, and I'm sorry that that people are in such a difficult situation right now. It must feel quite alone. I wanted to come back to a couple of things from the presentation that won't, I think, take away how difficult that is, but might help day by day a little bit. And the first one was focusing on the things that are in your control. And the second one was focusing on the here and now and trying to perhaps take each day or each bit of each day as it comes and focus on what you're doing then. So for some people, mindfulness is quite helpful for keeping your mind on the here and now rather than worrying about the future and the uncertainty and the fact we all don't know how long this is going to last. It's not suitable for everybody, but if it's something that's a good fit that works for you, on that resources page, I had a link to Headspace, who've made a set of free guided meditations available called Weathering the Storm. For some people, there might be some helpful things in there that help you kind of just stay in the present moment and focusing on what you're doing here and now. I think the other thing I wanted to say was to really encourage people in that situation to use the help and support that's available. A lot of the community have really rallied together, and I've seen a lot of will and a lot of desire to help and support people who are more vulnerable. I know that quite often in clinic it comes up that that's really difficult for people, and accepting help from other people can feel quite hard. And a lot of people worry that they might be burdening someone else if they ask them for help. But actually, if they do try and kind of dip a toe in, they might find that other people feel really glad, perhaps feel privileged to have been asked, perhaps were wondering but feeling worried that they didn't know how to help someone else. And you might find that it makes your relationship closer. So I'd really encourage people to reach out to those people who might be sources of help and support. And that also includes people in the NHS, it also includes your specialist centre or your local mental health service or your GP. We are still here. We've heard from lots of people that they feel a bit reticent about getting in touch or asking for help because, of course, there's a lot in the news about how busy the NHS is at the moment. But your regular services are still operating. We are still doing our jobs. You can still contact us for help. And in fact, we want you to contact us if you need help.
Thanks so much for that, Lynn. We have 2 questions now that Emily is going to ask. Oh, you're just on mute, Emily.
Right, there we are. Sorry about that. So the first question is, my disabled son is not able to leave home due to shielding, but his 2 able-bodied siblings are going outside for exercise. How do I try to explain and make this okay for him? Is the first question.
I think that's a good question for Emma, probably.
Hi.
Me.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Hi. So I'm Penny, psychologist. That's it's a really good question to be thinking about. Obviously, children exist within a family and siblings, so thinking about their context as well. Again, like Lynn said, it's difficult to give advice to individual families when we don't know the full context. But I had some thoughts about, or some tips, perhaps, to manage a situation like that. It might be that, going back to what Emma said in terms of having routine and structure, if there's something that the young person could choose for himself to do in his day that other people don't get to do at home, so that he has something for himself that other people aren't doing. The other thing is, I'm not sure whether the other siblings are going out together, and whether that it's worth thinking about whether the siblings could go out one at a time, if that's possible, if they're old enough, or with a parent or another adult, so that the young person isn't left at home without a sibling. So that's sort of being shared, and depending on his level of understanding, again, going back to what Emma said, in terms of using social stories in terms of understanding why somebody might need to stay at home to help with that. So those are just some thoughts. I don't know if Emma has any others.
So is a situation in which the siblings aren't able to go out because they're all shielding together as a family?
No, I think this is I don't know the exact details, to be honest. I think it was just the question, to repeat it again, is that the son is not leaving home because of shielding.
Yes.
But I guess the family are deciding that the two able-bodied children should be able to go outside and exercise whilst maintaining social distancing. So I think that's the question. I'm afraid I don't know any more than that.
Yeah, I think, so that's, I hopefully I've covered some of that already with, perhaps, that he can have something to do at home that the others don't do. So he has something special to do if he can't go out. And then perhaps the siblings not going out at the same time. One stays at home with their brother. He doesn't feel like he's left alone, perhaps. The other thing is, again, depending on this young person's ability, whether he's able to connect with other people in a similar situation, either remotely or online or by telephone, so that he doesn't feel like he's the only one.
Yes, scheduling in a social contact with somebody from the school or a friend or family member might be a good time to distract him away from the fact that he's not going out while his siblings aren't. But just acknowledging it does feel unfair. It does feel, validating those feelings that the boy rightly has.
I was thinking the same thing as you, Emma, about acknowledging the frustration and anger that they must be feeling. And also, I think for the parents or carers who find themselves in that situation where one sibling's being treated a bit differently from the others in their point of view, if you were to practice kind of tuning into thoughts and noticing what you're thinking, they might be having a lot of thoughts that make them feel quite guilty. And I was just thinking it might be useful for parents to spend a bit of time becoming aware of those, so they can just make sure that that it opens up decisions for them about how to respond to those feelings and how to respond to the feelings in the young person, which, like Emma said, are totally understandable, and perhaps make sure that they can express them in a healthy way in the right place.
Thank you all so much. And just the second question that came in, I'm trying to juggle being a full-time parent, a full-time carer, working from home, and now homeschooling too. Everyone says I need to look after myself as well, but it feels like time to do that just doesn't exist, and I'm not sure how I can make that time. Do you have any advice?
I had a few thoughts about that one, because I think it's something that again comes up a lot when I'm talking with people who are dealing with rare conditions for themselves or in their families. I guess some of the things that I thought were, well, first of all, that it is really hard and none of us can do everything. And I listened to a podcast by the Association for Child and Adolescent Mental Health, and one of the things they did was list all the people who were usually involved in your child's life, from the teacher to the dinner lady to the playtime supervisor, and sort of make a point that it's not realistic to expect anybody to take on all of those roles, as well as being a parent, as well as doing their own job perhaps, and everything that they would usually be doing. So something does have to give. Not everything can get done. And I know I've said, and other people have also said, how important it is to make some time for self-care. And I do think that's true. I think, excuse me, anyone who tuned into the webinar before, because I said the same thing there. I kind of always tell the same story about how if you're on a flight and the oxygen masks drop down from the ceiling, they always say you should put on your own before you put on an oxygen mask for a child who's traveling with you. And of course, everybody understands why that is. I do think it's important to recognize that part of being a good carer is taking care of yourself. So unfortunately, I don't have an answer that can make more time in the day for you. And I really feel for people who are struggling with a really overloaded schedule at the moment. I think a lot of people are. I think perhaps the only things I can suggest are trying to make sure that what you're doing is maintainable, because this is a situation that's lasting for some time. So, if it doesn't feel maintainable to keep not putting aside time to take care of yourself, it does need to be something you think about, and it might mean making some hard sacrifices in other areas about what else you're not going to be able to do at the moment. So I suppose those were my thoughts about it, but I'm sure Emma and Penny will also have some thoughts.
I think this is a very familiar thing that Penny and I have been hearing about from the families that we've been speaking to, that you're just having to divide your time and divide your attentions between too many different things. And often I think parents put themselves at the very bottom, but as Lynn has rightly said, you know, we need to maintain ourselves because we don't know how long this will last for. I suppose it doesn't have to be, in terms of time, it doesn't have to be a huge commitment if you're going to do something for yourselves. It might even, you know, be 10 minutes of having a bath, or having a walk by yourself, or doing something with your child that you know you will enjoy, you know, recognizing that that's something that will nourish you and give you a bit of resilience. So yes, trying to be realistic. I think planning these things ahead, if there are other carers in the house, making sure that you know, you're each giving each other a bit of space, and booking that in. Sometimes we're better at looking after other people, you know, our partners or other carers, than we are for ourselves. And so encouraging each other to take that time as well can be really helpful and important.
Anyone else, any tips for that particular question, or should we move on to the final question that we've got? So the final question is, I have children with learning disabilities and I'm finding it hard to explain to them what's going on and why we can't get out in particular. Can you share any tips? And I think in particular around maybe the language that people could use to help try and explain the situation.
Sorry, I've stayed on mute because I was thinking Penny and Emma probably have more
Yes,
experience in that than me.
I'm here. Sorry, I was looking at Emma, but I'm happy to come in here. Yeah, I think you know, Emma's sort of talked a bit about using, you know, very simple, straightforward, developmentally appropriate language in order to explain how things are at the moment, and using stories or visuals or pictures in order to explain. I did have some thoughts as well. We are sort of at the moment focusing on what we can't do, and that we can't go out, and that's can be quite tricky as well. It can make us feel more trapped in a way, and so perhaps shifting the focus on what we can do, and you know, when we sort of have more structure and routine, we tend to thrive on that, and children in particular, and children will get used to a routine fairly quickly. So if the routine becomes more one of being at home but having activities to do at home and focusing on what one can do, those questions are likely to reduce perhaps. So it's, yeah, just to recap, just simple, straightforward explanations with pictures perhaps, and but not you know, over focusing on what one can't do and not being able to go out, but more focusing on what you can do, and doing things that are pleasurable and enjoyable for everybody.
That's brilliant. Has anyone else got anything else to add to that one? Thanks so much for that. Thank you so much. That's the end of the questions actually. So and coming now to the end of the webinar as well. So I just wanted to say a huge thank you, particularly to Lynn and Emma and Penny, for sharing your expertise during this really difficult time. And I think people having direct access to your expertise at this time is you know, really reassuring for people, and I'm hoping that's what a lot of people will have got from today's webinar. The final slide is just the email address for Metabolic Support UK and Duchenne UK if anybody wants to get in touch or follow up after the webinar, and ask us any additional questions, and we'll try to get back to you with some answers on those. We are recording the webinar as well, so we'll be sharing that as soon as it's uploaded. So yeah, that's it from me. Just a huge thank you, and I hope that it has helped lots of people out there who've tuned in. And just a final word from Emily.
Thanks so much, Lindsay. And I just wanted to thank Lynn, Penny and Emma for that. It was fantastic. And, you know, as a mother of a child with a rare disease, a lot of what you said really resonated with me. And I suppose my key take-homes for today are, you know, you are resilient, which I really appreciated, because I do believe resilience is at the heart of our community. We will get through this. We shouldn't be too hard on ourselves, and ask for help if you need it, especially if that help might enable you to find some me time, some time to look after yourself, because this is a marathon, not a sprint, and we all need to help each other. So thank you all again so much for a very, very interesting hour.
Thanks so much, guys.